Do you know the cardinal numbers in English? I want to share with you a rather strange fact about learning numbers. In order to understand this strange fact, you will need to know a little about the CEFR. Have you heard of the CEFR? Well, CEFR is the acronym for the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. It was created in the 1970s to standardize language learning in Europe. In other words, the CEFR created standard levels that could be used and applied to all European languages. Later, it was extended as a global standard to define common levels for all world languages. The reason for creating these levels was to give all people in Europe a way to measure ability and proficiency in different languages. You may know these levels, but I will outline them here in case you do not. A1 is called beginner. A2 is called elementary. B1 is called intermediate. B2 is called upper intermediate. C1 is called advanced, and C2 is called proficiency. Now, here is the strange thing about the CEFR and learning numbers in a language. According to the CEFR, an A1 beginner should know, or at least recognize, the cardinal and ordinal numbers from 1 to 100. In case you didn't know, the cardinal numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, and the ordinal numbers are 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and so on. However, many of the students I have taught at much higher levels than A1 did not know them well. In some cases, I have had students in my English classes who were generally at B2 or C1 level, but they did not know how to express or write cardinal or ordinal numbers. Isn't that strange? If a student of English is advanced in most language skills, but at elementary or even beginner level with numbers, we would call this a huge contradiction. But why does this contradiction exist? So, I think that there are two answers to that question. The first answer is, of course, that the CEFR levels are not an exact science, and that a student may have achieved an overall level in a language, but that level does not tell the whole story of the student's ability. In other words, a student who has achieved a certain CEFR level overall is not necessarily always functioning at that level in all 4 skills. Therefore, if a person says, "I'm C1 in English," it probably means that they generally operate at a C1 level, and they may even have an exam result as evidence. But their true ability in the 4 skills could be different. Perhaps they are B1 in reading, B2 in writing, C1 in speaking, and C2 in listening. A level is nothing more than an indicator of a general reality. Every person is unique, and C1 means something different for every single student of English. What I'm trying to say here is that the levels are not an objective measure of a person's true ability. The levels are subjective. The second answer to this question relates to how difficult numbers are in different languages. Even though the CEFR states that an A1 beginner student should know or have a general understanding of the cardinal and ordinal numbers from 1 to 100. There is a very great difference between the difficulty of learning these numbers in, for example, Spanish and Finnish. The ordinal numbers in Spanish are relatively easy, but ridiculously difficult in Finnish. And even though the Spanish ordinal numbers are not that difficult to master, I must admit that I can't always remember all of the rules for them. So, here are the 2 key takeaways from this first part of the episode. Firstly, you can have a good level of English and still not be an expert in a relatively basic aspect of the language. This is okay and it's normal. Secondly, learning and expressing numbers correctly is a tricky thing in every language. That's also okay and normal. In this part of the lesson, I would like to focus on a few very simple rules that will enable you to use cardinal numbers correctly. I strongly recommend that you go to linguacade.com so that you can follow the free transcript while you listen. If you follow the transcript, then you will be able to see the numbers that I say. I always find it very helpful to see the language that I hear, because it helps me to embed the learning much more quickly. Without a doubt, the most important rule to learn when saying cardinal numbers is knowing where to use the word and. If you only learn one rule about expressing cardinal numbers in English, make it this one. When you say a number in English, you must say and between hundreds and tens, and between hundreds and single-digit numbers. Here are some examples. 425, 168, 799, 232, 315. Even if there are no tens or multiples of 10, you must still add the word and before single digits. Here are some examples of this. 405, 108, 709, 202, 305. Additionally, if there are thousands but no hundreds, it is still essential to add the word and before tens or single-digit numbers. Here are some examples. 1005, 7099, 2002, 3055. In these examples, can you see that in compound numbers of more than 100, the word and is always required before tens and single-digit numbers? In fact, it doesn't matter how large the compound numbers are, the word and is still required before tens and single-digit numbers. Listen to these examples. 3,426,001, 12,028, 49,074. In the simplest terms, it would be helpful for you to remember that you always need to say the word and before tens or single-digit numbers. This is the case even when you say numbers in the hundreds of thousands. Listen to these examples. 397,203. 100,423,001. To finish this section on when to use the word and, let's look at some examples of when the word and is not needed. Remember that we do not use the word and if there are no tens or single-digit numbers. Listen to these examples. 300,900, 25 million, 10 billion, 500 million, 300,000, 100. 1 trillion. The United Kingdom and the United States use the short-scale system of number generation. This means that a million is 1,000,000, a billion is 1,000 million, a trillion is 1,000 billion, and a quadrillion is 1,000 trillion, and therefore has 15 zeros. Quadrillion is not a word that we use much in English, although you may hear it to describe distances in space or theoretical periods of time. The next important rule is about pluralizing. If you pluralize a word, you make it plural, usually by adding an S on the end of the word. Now, many languages pluralize cardinal numbers, but English does not. I don't want to give many examples of incorrect uses of cardinal numbers because it is not good or helpful even to hear incorrect phrases. However, it is important to remember that no cardinal numbers in English are pluralized. This means that you cannot add an S to the words 10, 100, 1,000, million, billion, or trillion when they are cardinal numbers. Therefore, you cannot say 500s or 2000s and 300s. This is completely wrong. There is, however, one situation in which you can pluralize these number words, and that is when they are used as indefinite nouns rather than cardinal numbers. Listen to the following examples. In the first phrase, the number is used as a cardinal number, and it cannot be pluralized. In the second phrase, the number is used as an indefinite noun, and it can be pluralized. I counted 35 cars that were parked in the field. Here, 35 is a cardinal number, so it is not pluralized. A person counted the exact number of cars in the field. Tens of cars were parked in the field. Here, the word tens is being used as an indefinite noun to describe 20 or more. We do not know exactly how many cars were parked in the field. There could have been anywhere from 20 to 200 cars. Approximately 700 people attended the demonstration in Paris. Here, 700 is a cardinal number, so it is not pluralized. We have a general idea of how many people attended the demonstration in Paris. It was more or less 700. Hundreds of people attended the demonstration in Paris. Here, the word hundreds is being used as an indefinite noun to describe 200 or more. We do not have such a clear idea of how many people attended the demonstration in Paris. It could be anywhere from 200 to 2,000. An indefinite noun is a noun that is not definite or exact. This means that the noun does not give a clear idea of the exact number. Here are the common number words that can be used as indefinite nouns. Tens of means anywhere between 20 and 200. Hundreds of means anywhere between 200 and 2,000. Thousands of means anywhere between 2,000 and 2 million, although you can say tens of thousands of for any number between 20,000 and 200,000, and hundreds of thousands of for any numbers greater than 200,000. Millions of means anywhere between 2 million and 2 billion. Billions of means anywhere between 2 billion and 2 trillion. Trillions of means any number above 2 trillion. Usually, when people use the phrase trillions of, it is used to describe astronomical numbers, such as the numbers of stars or galaxies in the known universe. There are also a couple of other historical numbers that are sometimes used as indefinite nouns. These are the word dozen, which means 12, and the word score, which means 20. Now, these words are old-fashioned, and they are not much used nowadays, but you may see or hear them sometimes in set contexts. The word dozen is often used to describe numbers of food items. This is a set context. For example, you may hear someone say half a dozen eggs, meaning 6 eggs. A dozen donuts, meaning 12 donuts. Or 2 dozen sausages, meaning 24 sausages. The word score is only really used as an indefinite noun, and it is certainly not used as much as dozen. Listen to these examples. Dozens of teenagers were waiting in line to buy tickets for the concert. This means that several multiples of 12 teenagers were waiting in line. In reality, this is just another way of saying tens of teenagers were waiting in line. Scores of people were leaving the school building when I arrived. This means that several multiples of 20 people were leaving the school building. In reality, this is just another way of saying tens of people were leaving the school building. Now, if I'm being pedantic, I would say that scores of communicates a higher number than dozens of, simply because 20 is a higher number than 12. However, whether you say tens of, dozens of, or scores of, these all communicate a number less than 200. If you have more than 200, then you should say hundreds of. Before we move on, let's remember that if we use numbers as indefinite nouns, we generally use them with of and a plural noun. For example, hundreds plus of plus plural noun. Here's a final example to illustrate this. First, I thought there were hundreds of people at the concert. Then I realized that there were thousands. Here, I could say thousands of people, but it is understood from the first sentence that I am referring to people, so I do not need to repeat the words of people. To finish this rule on numbers used as indefinite nouns, I would like to mention other simpler ways of communicating indefinite numbers. Listen to these phrases. There were approximately 20 people in the room. There were more or less 20 people in the room. There were about 20 people in the room. There were 20-ish people in the room. The words approximately, more or less, and about, followed by a number, are all adverbs of degree, which means adverbs that communicate how much. In this case, these adverbs all mean somewhere close to that number, so approximately 20 means somewhere close to 20, perhaps 18, 19, 20, 21, or 22. I just can't be sure. The word ish is not an adverb of degree. It is a suffix, which means a set of letters that are added to the end of the word to modify it. I just love the suffix ish. It's informal and generally used in conversation, but it also means something like that, or to some extent. Theoretically, ish is an approximate adjective. Listen to these examples with ish. My friend is coming at 8-ish tonight. Here, 8-ish means at around 8 p.m. I'd say 50-ish people turned up to the party. Here, 50-ish means approximately 50 people. He had reddish-brown shoes. Here, reddish means somewhat red or quite red. I was tired last night. Well, tired-ish. Here, tired-ish means somewhat tired or quite tired. You can also use the word ish on its own to communicate the idea of quite, somewhat, sort of. It's highly informal, but it's a great way to communicate a lot with one short word. Listen to this example. Are you angry with me? Ish. Here, ish means yes, I am somewhat angry with you, but I'm not very angry. I'm just sort of angry. Are you thirsty? Ish. Here, ish means yes, I am somewhat thirsty, but not very thirsty. I would be happy to have a drink, but I don't need one. Ish is a really fun suffix in English. If you would like to know more about how to use it, please listen to the deep dive for this episode. Another small rule worth mentioning is that it is possible to use the word a instead of one before 100, 1,000, million, billion, and trillion, if you don't want to emphasize the number. You can only use the word a if you say the exact number. Listen to these examples. There are more than 1 billion people actively learning English in the world. Here, 1 billion is the normal, correct, and standard way of saying the number. There are more than 1 billion people actively learning English in the world. Here, I'm using 1 billion because I don't particularly want to emphasize the word billion. The general rule in English is that if you use more words, or if you make a phrase longer, it is because you want to emphasize something. If you use fewer words, or if you make a phrase shorter, it is because you don't want to emphasize something. The other small rules for cardinal numbers are more visible in writing, so you will only be able to see how these work if you are reading the transcript at linguacade.com while listening to this episode. The first little rule for writing numbers relates to the use of a hyphen. A hyphen is a little dash, which is a little horizontal line that connects two words. When writing the long forms of cardinal numbers, it is always necessary to place a hyphen between tens from 21 and above and single-digit numbers. Single-digit numbers are the numbers between 1 and 9. If you look back at the written examples in this episode, you will see that every number from 21 to 99 has a written hyphen between the tens and the single digits. Here are some examples: 58, 239, 4,462,131. The second little rule relates to the use of commas and decimal points. A comma is the little tick that separates words or numbers, and the decimal point is the punctuation dot that is also used as a full stop or period. First, let's look at how the comma is used to separate numbers when they are written as numerals, the actual numbers, and when they are written as long-form words. When writing the numerals only, a comma is always placed in front of every 3 digits. So, there is a comma before the thousands, before the millions, before the billions, before the trillions, and so forth. Interestingly, a comma must also be used in the same place when writing out the long form of the number. Look at this example: 999,999,999,999. This is a great example because it contains nearly all the punctuation that a person would need when writing a number, and it shows some of the key rules from this lesson. You can see that the commas split the numerals before the thousands, before the millions, and before the billions. You can also see that the comma is used in exactly the same places for the long-form words. This example also has the word "and" in the correct place, and the written hyphen between the tens and single digits in 99. Last but not least, meaning that this is the last thing, but it is not the least important. It is important to mention the decimal point. The decimal point, which is usually called point, is the punctuation dot that is also used as a full stop or period, but it has a different function in numbers. Listen to these examples. 25.5% of people prefer dark chocolate. I scored 9.8 out of 10 in my final exam. The value of pi, rounded to 4 decimal places, is 3.1416. There was a 0.6% or 0.6% drop in GDP, gross domestic product, this quarter. In English, the decimal point is used to communicate a part of a whole number less than 1. This is an important thing to mention because if you want to communicate a part of a number less than 1 when speaking, you actually need to say the word point. Now, some languages have their own different system of dividing numbers, and for this reason, students sometimes assume that their system works in English. this can cause confusion. For example, some other languages use a decimal point instead of a comma to separate large whole numbers, and they use a comma instead of a decimal point to communicate a part of a number less than 1. I have heard students say 1,25 when they really intended to say 1.25. There are times when it could be quite important to get this right. As a general rule, you never need to say the word comma in numbers, even though it is written. However, you always need to say the word point. Here is a final example to demonstrate this. The prospector found a gold nugget that weighed 1,372.5 grams. This is a good final example because it contains a lot of the rules we have studied today. Now, you may listen to this episode and think, wait a minute, Jason has certainly not covered all the important rules relating to numbers. That is true. What I have tried to do here is focus on the highest frequency mistakes that my students have made with cardinal numbers, and then cover them in one lesson. My aim here has been to provide help for the main problems that students have when expressing numbers, not to provide rules for every possible situation relating to numbers. If you would like to know more, particularly about ordinal numbers and numbers as adjectives, then I encourage you to get the deep dive for this episode. Each deep dive provides a masterclass on the words highlighted in bold in the free episode and explores other related topics on a deeper level. If you subscribe to the Linguacade Deep Dives on Patreon, you will get access to all deep dives for all levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Subscribing to the deep dives is the best way to support my work as a creator generally. I absolutely love what I do, and it is a huge encouragement to receive support for it. If subscription is not for you, but you would still like to revise ordinal numbers, I recommend that you listen to the beginner episode 3 entitled Age, Birthdays, Months and Numbers 11 to 100. That episode contains the ordinal numbers from 1st to 31st, because those ordinal numbers are vital for expressing dates, such as the 29th of December. If the content in that beginner episode is generally too easy for you, a useful hack is to listen to the lesson on the Linguacade website and speed up the audio to 1.5 times normal speed. By the way, a useful hack is a collocation that means a helpful and quick solution. Finally, in my next intermediate episode, I will be looking at how to express years and the digit 0, given that these are absolutely vital for basic communication. Thank you for joining me today on this journey through numbers. If I'm being entirely honest, I must say that reviewing these rules has been useful and helpful for me too.